All right, Father, last topic we had for tonight, you've mentioned on the program several times Father Paul Robinson of the Society of St. Pius X recently put out a video talking about the doubtful sacraments of the Novus Ordo and the SSPX stance on conditionally reordaining specifically priests to come from the Novus Ordo. You've mentioned several times that you'd like to respond to that, Father. I know the hope was to eventually do a standalone video, kind of going through that point by point. But I know, Father, you spent some time looking at that video. Do you have anything you'd like to share with us so far to this point? Any particular points you'd like to?
Well, Father Robinson's program is like questions with Father or something like that. Ask Father goes on for about an hour, and he's answering objections basically that the host is proposing to him. And there are a number of points there that I think really need to be straightened out. It would take maybe a half an hour program. I just haven't really had the time to sit down and to do anything. I've got the talking points down. I just need to organize them, and I just haven't had the time because there's just too much going on right now. But I'd like to do that because I think what Father Robinson raises there is really a question that is even deeper or more fundamental than the Society of St. Pius X not conditionally ordaining all of the Novus Ordo priests who come to them, and why they don't conditionally ordain all of them. Father Robinson's answers to the objections, I think, raise all kinds of further questions that probe more deeply into the very concept that's behind the Society of St. Pius X and how the SSPX views the new order. And I think that I see that problematic. They evidently view the new order, the Novus Ordo, very differently, fundamentally different than I and other traditional Catholics who say modernism is a poison, it's an evil, it's a synthesis of all heresies. We cannot collaborate with it or cooperate with it in any way. The Society of St. Pius X doesn't see it that way. I think that can be readily demonstrated. And I think Father Robinson's program demonstrates that idea. Is a kind of a manifestation or a symptomatic of that idea that, yes, we can work with these people. I think this goes contrary to what Archbishop Lefebvre himself concluded. This has to do actually with what Father Robinson mentions about the priests at Ridgefield, the 9 priests. He talks about being expelled by Archbishop Lefebvre. He got that right. I mean, for the longest time, they were referring to those 9 priests, American priests of the Society of St. Pius X, of which I am one. For the longest time, they kept referring to us as the priests who abandoned Archbishop Lefebvre. We abandoned him. We didn't abandon him. As a matter of fact, even when we saw there were problems and issues that in conscience we couldn't go along with, like the marriage annulments and the Novus Ordo and so on, it was still our hope that we could find a way to work together. But we were expelled, summarily expelled. So at least Father Robinson got that right. He said we were expelled, and that's the truth. In fact, locks were changed. I was locked out of my quarters, actually. So that's how abruptly this was done. And then a month later, at least a month later, I received a note card in the mail that said, Father Jenkins, you were expelled for agreeing with the rest. And at the bottom were initials RNW. That was it. That's all I was told. I came back from the missions one night, found my keys didn't work anymore. All of my things were in the room, the room I'd left just like 24 hours before. And I was not told anything. So I had to go off and find a place to stay that night. And I did. There's a place nearby. And I wound up going down to Oyster Bay. That's where Bishop Brother Kelly was and others at the time. They weren't locked out of there. And it was there that I received this note card. And I thought, this is a very peculiar way to do things. Now, RNW, the initials of Richard Neville Williamson, right? So, I mean, there's a whole backstory to this, too, of my getting into the seminary, getting my things, clearing out of there, and so on. But I won't get into all of the details of that. Some of them they're sad, but there's some kind of comical moments, too, But while I was there, I went to see Archbishop Lefebvre. He was actually there in the seminary in Richfield at that time. And so once I succeeded in regaining entry to the seminary to get my things out, I went to see Monsieur Lefebvre. And and I don't know how much detail to go into. I'm saying this just to point out that Father Robinson was not there at the time, right? We're talking about 1983. And he did not have firsthand knowledge of any of this, okay? All he knows is what he's been told or read. And I can see that what he's been told or what he's read is not accurate about what the real issue was. No one ever asked me if I was a Sedevacantist, except Archbishop Lefebvre, actually, when I went to see him, right? He asked me, do I put John Paul II's or John Paul II's name in the canon of the Mass? And I said, no, I do not. And I said this before on the program. And Monsieur Lefebvre sat there for, I don't know, it might have been 10 seconds, felt like 10 minutes. It might have been 10 seconds of saying nothing. And then he asked me why. And it surprised me that he asked me why. And I told him, well, Monsieur Lefebvre, it's because at that point in the Mass, I'm about to consecrate the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ and face him in the holy sacrifice. And I cannot lie to him at a time like that. I cannot lie to God the Father at a time like that. Why? Well, the canon of the Mass begins, Te igitur clementissime pater. It's a direct address to God the Father. The whole canon of the Mass is, right? Direct address to God the Father. And I cannot stand there and tell God the Father that I am one in faith with John Paul II, Paul VI before him. I can't do it. Any more than today, I can say I was one in faith with Francis and I'm one in faith with Leo. Can't say that. Because I don't believe I am. I'm quite convinced I'm not. I have the traditional Catholic faith. I believe what's in the Catechism. And I believe these supreme pontiffs of the New Order have made it very clear they do not have that same faith. So I cannot honestly say that I am one in faith with them. It would be a lie, a bald-faced lie. God knows it's a lie. I know it's a lie, and I can't lie. I didn't explain all of that to Archbishop Lefebvre. I just said in my fundamental French that that it would be a mensonge because I don't believe that I have the same faith, and I don't believe they have the same faith I do. And I think that's made clear in many ways. And Monsieur Lefebvre then went back into his silent mode and thought. I could hear his thinking. And I think what he expected me to say was, well, I'm convinced he's not a pope, and I'm not going to recognize him as an anti-pope. Um, I guess Father Robinson would pretend that that was, the point. But I made it clear to Monsieur Lefebvre that wasn't really an issue in my mind at the time. It was one can draw the conclusions. If he doesn't have the same faith I have, and it's a traditional Catholic faith, okay, can he be the Pope if he doesn't have the Catholic faith? I didn't go that far, okay. But the point was, I cannot lie and say that I have the same faith that he has. And I think Monsieur Lefebvre actually thought, well, he doesn't really have, he's not one in faith with them either. I think he realized that very clearly. There are statements that he'd made, which are very, very clear. To us, actually. Us American SSPX members. So, Tom, he just changed the subject. He just changed the subject immediately. Then, so there was nothing to pursue there. I think he agreed in practice, in principle. So anyway, whether this to say we were all sedevacantists and that's why we were expelled, that's simply not the truth. And we heard Archbishop Lefebvre himself say very clearly, and one does not have to be a member of l'Académie Française to understand what he said here in French. He said, I will not say that he is not the Pope, but neither will I say that one can't say that he's not the Pope. That's what he said to us. Yeah. And he raised the question in the great weapon of Satan, right? What was it?
Masterstroke of Satan.
Masterstroke of Satan, he said. L'obéissance, obedience. He said, le coup de maître de Satan. Said, there are those who say that Paul VI is not a true pope. Perhaps they're right. The history will tell. The church will tell us in the future. So he was open to the thought at that time. Maybe he changed his mind later and he thought, well, we had to rule out sedevacantism as an option. Again, we talked a little bit about that before. And I can see his difficulty in that. I saw the same difficulty myself. One has to explain that because no matter which way you turn here, there are difficulties. There are theological conundrums, right? It's like this sedevacantists and the anti-sedevacantists going at it, continually going at it. And the anti-sedevacantists are saying, oh, look at the dangers of denying a true pope. But the sedevacantists are saying, look at the dangers of following a false pope. There are dangers there too. Don't you see that? So, pick your poison here. Which danger do you find the more scary? So this seems to be the conundrum that is facing Catholics, traditional Catholics today. But I would say, with regard to Father Robinson, and I don't want to expatiate on this too much because I do intend to have a point-by-point response to what he has to say because I think it goes deeper than the mere question why they don't conditionally ordain everybody. And there are historical things too, like the question of Father Stark. I was there. I was in on that. I was with there are a few of us who went to Archbishop Lefebvre in St. Louis when we were there to ask about Father Sullivan and Father Stark being conditionally ordained, because they had both been ordained in the Novus Ordo. And Monsignor Lefebvre intended to do so. That's what he told us. And that very next morning, very early, before the ceremony for our seminary in Ridgefield, before the ceremony ordaining the deacons and so on, Archbishop Lefebvre did have a ceremony of conditional ordination, but only for Father Sullivan, because Father Stark said, no, I don't need it. And we asked Monsieur Lefebvre afterwards about that, back in Oyster Bay. We were sitting speaking with him. And he said, well, I did conditionally ordain Father Sullivan, but Father Stark did not allow me to do so. He simply said that he was convinced he was validly ordained and that he refused to be conditionally ordained, right? And the Archbishop basically is, like that, So I don't know how much longer Father Stark was working with us after that. Probably not long, as I recall. But anyway, we got the impression that Archbishop Lefebvre kind of resigned himself to that, and he couldn't compel him to be conditionally ordained. Now, again, Father Robinson gives an account of Archbishop Lefebvre talking to the seminarians, telling them that Father Stark is an intelligent man, a Jesuit. He knows if he's conditionally ordained or not. I make the decision. He says he's conditionally. He says he's validly ordained. He says he's validly ordained, and so I make the decision, and I accept that, and that's the end of it. That's the way I recall Father Robinson presents it. But there's no way that Father Robinson could have been there for that conference personally to have heard this, to have witnessed this. He's heard about it, read about it. I don't know if there's a video of it. I don't know what he's seen. But, I mean, Archbishop Lefebvre died in 1991. And Father Robinson wasn't a seminarian at Acon until years later. So Archbishop Lefebvre had passed away long before. Father Robinson could have heard him say these words. So he's getting his information from other sources. One thing, just to kind of put a cap on what you're saying here, Tom, or what you were asking about. Yeah, I found it very interesting, among other things, and the other things we'll talk about when you get a chance. But I found it very interesting that Father Robinson said, well, there are dangers either way, he said. I mean, you look at what he said. He said there are dangers either way. There are dangers in conditionally ordaining everyone. There are dangers in not conditionally ordaining everyone. So he recognized explicitly there are dangers there. And it's very clear that when he says the danger in not ordaining conditionally everyone are risking invalidity. That's the danger, right? Let's face it. But he says on the other side is a danger when you have a principle of conditionally ordaining everyone, then you risk setting up like a separate church, like a parallel church. And that spoke volumes. Okay, so the idea is if you do question the validity of the new rite in itself, so that you should conditionally ordain everyone who comes to you from it, that indicates that you reject something about the new, not only the new rite, but the new church that has given you the new rite. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to cut those ties. You don't want to send the message to the new church, we don't accept you. So we have to accept that the rites you've given us are okay and valid, unless there's some anomaly that we find that, let's say, departs from your rite, for which we have to conditionally ordain. But given your new rite, we just accept it as such. That is, it is intrinsically valid unto itself. And so you have to send this message, because if they didn't send this message, they would say, well, that's like schismatic. Then we're saying that's not the Catholic Church that is giving us this right. And they can't bring themselves to objectively look at the new rite, because they say, oh, if we do look at the new rite objectively and question its validity, then what's behind that is, well, then we're questioning the authority behind the new rite. And as soon as we start questioning that authority, oh my goodness, oh, Shikalor, what's going to happen to us, Are we looking in the direction of sedevacantism? Are we looking to be called schismatic? Oh, heaven forbid that we should be now denounced as that and cut ties with the Novus Ordo. So they're afraid of taking that step. They can't even bring themselves to look at it objectively. Even though Father Bishop Tissier de Malaret said that we cannot accept this new rite, which has been sabotaged. He said it very clearly. It's been sabotaged, he said. The new rite itself. He's not talking about the abuses or the new rite as it is being let's say, modified by modernist bishops. He's talking about the new rite of ordination in itself. It's been sabotaged, he says, but they just can't allow themselves to question it, because if they do, that raises a whole list of other questions, and they're not willing to go that way. But it's kind of scary when he says there are dangers either way, and we've chosen these dangers, to accept the dangers of invalidity rather than the dangers of questioning the validity of the new rite and all that goes with it. He says, oh, you might have scrupulosity, people asking questions. Well, today, if you want to invoke scrupulosity, just risk having invalid sacraments. That really will stir up a lot of scrupulosity, if that's what he's trying to avoid. So, but the fact that he recognizes that there's a danger of invalidity there, that is very troubling, because you, as a Catholic, you just can't have that. You just can't do that. There has to be some kind of provision to take away that danger, because that danger is the result of a doubt, which he dismisses as a negative doubt. Then he says there's a danger. But if there's a danger of invalidity, that's not a negative doubt, okay? He doesn't propose it then as a negative doubt anymore. So, I'm sorry, Father, but you're kind of mixing up theology here a little bit. But in any case, Tom, my question, one question I would have to him is this. Look, if you acknowledge that the new rite is valid, you may say it's inferior to the traditional rite, but it's still Catholic enough to be valid. How do you justify not using it out of obedience to the Holy See? You recognize the authority of Francis, you recognize the authority of Leo, you formally recognize that authority. How can you say, well, this new rite you've given us is valid, we recognize that it's valid, but we don't like it. We just don't like it. We find fault with it, and we're not going to use it. How do you justify that in your own mind? How do you justify that in light of even the traditional Catholic faith? If I were convinced that a man were truly the vicar of Christ on earth and the supreme pontiff of the Catholic Church, I'd be looking to obey everything, every way I could. Everywhere I could. I'd be looking to obey. I'd feel an obligation. If I saw clearly that a man here on earth was the vicar of Christ on earth and the supreme pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church, I would be mindful that I must obey in everything I can. They don't have that mentality. And I don't know how they justify that in their own minds. I don't see how they can justify not using the new rite of ordination themselves if they believe it's valid and Catholic. So there are a number of anomalies that pop up, as I'm listening to him speak there. And again, I mean, I'd like the opportunity to sit down with him and just kind of chat with him personally about it. Don't know that I'll ever get the opportunity to do so, but I hope somebody does. And perhaps if we do get a chance to sit down, or I get a chance to sit down and go through it systematically and point out the contradictions and anomalies, perhaps there are those who can bring those to his attention, and perhaps we'll get an answer.
Very good. Well, I know many of our viewers will look forward to that, Father, and I certainly will too. But